Last week, down in Memphis, Tennessee, the annual Freedom Fest event was held. This is the libertarian event that's held every year. And we were fortunate enough to host a phenomenal panel discussion at this event centered around the topic of the global war on farmers, as well as the push to get insect and synthetic meat to replace the protein in all of our diets. Now, the panel discussion was the result of a year-long documentary that we've been working on. It's called No Farmers, No Food. And for that documentary, we quite literally flew around the world in order to expose this globalist agenda that really has the potential to cripple all of our civil liberties. Now, there's a famous quote that says, "Whoever controls the food supply controls the people." And all warlords in history knew that fact. If you control the food, you're able to control the people. And unfortunately, what's happening today is that these green policies at the international level, whether it's the UN, the EU, the World Economic Forum, and so on, they're all being billed as necessary to save the planet. And these policies are actually now starting to go into effect around the world, including right here in America. And again, on paper, they sound great. They sound absolutely beautiful. Save the planet, end world hunger, gender equality. Who would want to disagree with that? But in practice, they undermine our food security, and they represent a true existential threat to our liberties as free citizens. That's exactly what we exposed in the documentary. How this global war on food and farmers and the food chain will lead to the eventual subservience of all the common people by the few elites. But again, exposing all this is really challenging because on the surface, it always sounds so good. Hey, agriculture contributes 33% to global emissions. Let's cut down that significantly in order to save the planet. But what they always fail to mention is that even if agriculture contributes, let's say, 20 to 33% of global emissions, well, it also represents 100% of the food supply. But hey, perhaps if we get rid of that, then maybe we can save the planet in more ways than one. Without people, well, everything will return to nature. Furthermore, in the documentary, we exposed how, in order to make up for the loss of the protein that will inevitably come as a result of getting rid of the farmers and livestock, well, there's huge investment that's right now being funneled into both insect farming as well as synthetic meat production. I hope we're all ready to eat the bugs. And so I'll say this, exposing this agenda is difficult. The agenda is multifaceted, it's global in scale, and a ton of people believe the propaganda surrounding it because it preys on people's compassion. Who doesn't want to be the good guy saving the planet? But the problem, of course, is that they're not saving the planet. They're essentially enacting the Great Leap Forward. Like you had in China, well, this is the new Great Leap Forward. And so while the World Economic Forum and all these myriad of globalist entities have an infinite amount of money to push forward their agenda, we here at the Epoch Times are frankly exposing that agenda on a shoestring budget. And so if you would like to help back this project and help us with funding not only to finish editing the documentary, but also make it such that once we publish it, once it gets released, it reaches and educates as many people as humanly possible, well, that will be absolutely awesome. There will be a link down in the description box below, and you can go to that link, you can sign up for updates, you can share this project with your friends, your family, and your acquaintances, and also you can donate some funding if you can, so that we can share the truth about what's really happening behind the scenes with the entire world. Again, the link will be right there at the top of the description box below. And now, without further ado, here's the awesome panel discussion at Freedom Fest. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And a bit of housekeeping, I'll mention that we have everyone here in the audience, but we'll also have people watching over on Epic TV. We'll be premiering this panel discussion next week. So everyone watching at home, hello. So to start with, I wanted to sort of give an idea of how this documentary came to be. About a year ago, I was seeing these, well, if you remember, a year ago was when you already had the war between Ukraine and Russia, which was putting a lot of pressure on the food supply throughout the world, the global food supply. And you have politicians, including Joe Biden, you had politicians in Germany, politicians in Africa, but that's, you know, they usually have problems there in South America, Asia, talking about the possibility of real food shortages coming on the horizon. And even though that was the messaging that was coming out, at the same time, you had protests in the Netherlands because farmers were saying that government policies were forcing them to shut down 40% of their farms. You had protests in Sri Lanka. You had the Canadian government come out with crazy nitrogen, well, I shouldn't say crazy, strict nitrogen emission standards. Same thing in Ireland, Germany, France, many countries. In the US, there's a lot of similar issues as well. And so I went to my editor and I said, you know, I wanted to figure out what's going on here. Why is it that these government around the world are pushing policies at a time when there's already big problems with the food supply globally. And so we did, and so we wound up traveling the world and putting together this documentary, sort of exposing how these policies trickle down from the UN level, from the international level, down to the national and local levels, and hamstring farmers in order to, quote unquote, save the planet, because supposedly agriculture pollutes the earth. But what they failed to account, like in that quote that we saw in the trailer with John Kerry, that even though the estimate is, let's say, 20 to 33% of emissions come from the agriculture sector, but what they failed to mention is that 100% of the food comes from the agriculture sector. So it's like, yeah, you could by getting rid of agriculture, you could save the planet in more ways than one, right? You can get rid of the people as well, and then everything can go back to being quote unquote natural. And so that's what we're able to figure out. But don't worry, because they do have a solution. If you get rid of the meat and all the food, there are insect farms and synthetic food plants that are being set up now and are being subsidized across the world. So I hope you are all looking forward to that. No? Oh, it sounds like someone is not ready to eat the bugs. So in the panel discussion here, we have several of these subject matter experts that we were able to find in the making of this documentary. We have Mr. Alex Newman, who's the president of the Liberty Sentinel Media, and he actually has been subjecting himself over the past dozen or so years to travel around the world, join these summits, and go through the actual minutia of the policy documents they're putting out. So he's a brave man who's been dealing with that. With Mr. Mark Morano, who's the author of The Great Reset as well as Green Fraud. So he knows quite a bit about what's going on there. And lastly, we have Ms. Margaret Byfeld, who is the executive director of the American Stewards of Liberty. And she's an expert at exposing Agenda 30 by 30, which is the sort of local American version, not version, but it's a subsidiary of Agenda 2030 at the international level. So let me get off the stage and introduce Alex Newman, who will sort of set the stage for us globally.
Hey guys, great to be here. Thank you so much. You guys know Klaus Schwab, right? You must eat the bugs. So I first noticed we had a problem in 2012. I was pretty fresh out of journalism school, and I used to live in South Africa, so I had a big interest in South Africa. And suddenly the president of the country, I'm going to show you a video of him, he starts singing about, we need to kill all the farmers. You think I'm kidding?
I went too.
This was 2012, about 11 years ago. He's singing in front of thousands of soldiers.
The
president says, bring me my machine gun, we're going to shoot them, they're going to run, shoot the farmer. There's a mistranslation in the subtitles. Boer actually means farmer in Dutch and in Afrikaans. So they're talking about, we're going to shoot the farmer. He's going to run. Now, what kind of a dumb idea is that? The farmers make the food that we all need to eat, right? Then I looked at Brazil, and I used to live in Brazil as well, so I had a big interest in what was going on in Brazil. Federal police and military, sometimes in UN costumes, were dismantling entire agricultural villages. They were expropriating hundreds of thousands of hectares of the best agricultural land, and they said they were going to give it back to some Indian tribes that supposedly lived there a few hundred years ago. So I called up the chief of the Indian tribes, of the Xavante Indians, and I said, hey, what's going on? Are they going to give this land, and what are you guys going to do with it? He said, that's not our land. We've never lived there. We're Indians of the Floresta, the jungle, not the Cerrado, the kind of savanna area where this agriculture was. So that was weird. Two countries where they're going after the farmers. They were literally holding these farmers at gunpoint, having them dismantle their little shacks. Later that same year, Communist China announced that they're going to force hundreds of millions of farmers and peasants off their land into these pre-built mega cities that they had already constructed, these big apartment blocks. So you have Brazil, South Africa, China. Of course, we all know what's going on in the United States, right? The Bundy Ranch. And then somebody from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization sent me this report. This came out in 2013. Nobody ever reads these things. But he said, this is important, you have to read this. So I read it and ended up writing an article about it. It was published in May of 2016. UN, let them eat bugs. Kind of the Marie Antoinette, I don't know that she really said that. A lot of people say she didn't. But the report was about how they're going to make us eat bugs. How meat and chicken and traditional agriculture were not sustainable. And the food of the future was going to have to be creepy crawlers. And they actually have a big section in the report about, those Westerners, they're pretty picky with their food. They're not really going to want to eat bugs. We're going to have to have a major propaganda campaign. We'll use state-funded media, and we'll use government indoctrination centers masquerading as schools to get them used to the idea of eating bugs. And so I reported all this over 10 years ago, and then along comes Joe Biden.
With regard to food shortages, yes, we did talk about food shortages, and it's going to be real.
It's going to be real, right? So, I mean, a lot of people think, I'm not going to eat bugs. That's crazy, right? And Klaus Schwab in the World Economic Forum, in their little video, they said by 2030, you're going to have to eat a lot less meat to save the planet. So how are they going to get people to eat bugs? Well, a combination of propaganda, indoctrinating children, and making you very, very hungry. So we've done a lot on this. I did a front page above the fold article for the Epic Times. This appeared about a year and a half, I think. UN, World Economic Forum, behind the global war on farmers. And what you'll find as you look at these policies is every single one of the national and state and local policies traces directly back to various UN and World Economic programs, World Economic Forum programs like Agenda 2030. Agenda 2030 was signed by every national government in the world in 2015 on behalf of the United States. Barack Obama called it an executive agreement. And it's a plan to totally transform every element of our lives. In fact, the head of the UN General Assembly at the time called it the master plan for humanity. And if you read the preface, it says over and over again, no one will be left behind. And here is the government-funded propaganda outlet known as PBS.
The future of food is being revolutionized by science, as new research helps bring unexpected ingredients to the table.
Kind of tastes like shrimp. They have this seafood quality to them.
It reminds you of like a Frito or a chip.
Just a Frito or a chip, okay? So it's crazy talk, right? And so this actually comes from my home state of Florida. Everybody thinks our government schools in Florida are great. They're not. But this was sent to me by the parent of a concerned fifth grader. She was told that she had to do these workshops, and bugs are the food of the future. And she said, actually, in the class, they told the kids that eating meat is bad for the planet. Your parents are bad for wanting to eat steak all the time. They say, here's the list of how much CO2 emissions, right? Crickets, you get 0.47 kilos of crickets per ounces of CO2, whatever. And you see that apparently bugs are really, really sustainable. The government knows quite a bit about eating bugs. Turns out it's very, very unhealthy. I pulled these right out of the National Library of Medicine 2017 study funded by the government. Said that the chitin in bugs, the exoskeletons, will provoke human innate immunity to generate a deluge of inflammatory cytokines which injure organs and, in persistent situations, lead to death, multiple sclerosis, systemic lupus, and cancer. Sign me up, right? So the goal, folks, is not to save the planet. It's not to save the climate. Like the revolutionaries used to say back in the 60s, the Students for a Democratic Society, the issue is never the issue. It's not about global warming. It's not about sustainable development. It's about enslaving humanity. They want to wipe out small, medium-sized producers, centralize food control in the hands of mega corporations in bed with the mega governments. They want to move the population into the mega cities and ultimately bring about this great reset in what they call the New World Order. And I'm out of time, but I'll leave you with
Dr. Kissinger, our time, our satellite time is running out. What wonderful opportunity to conclude our week here with such concrete proposals and ideas of how we can really create, I would say, a new world order.
A world order where everyone shall eat bugs. So, folks, and we'll talk more about this, I think, as we have time.
Thank you so much, Mark, Alex. You know, one thing I'll just piggyback off of that and mention is that what Alex mentioned here is what we discovered as well, where you have at the international level, just like, you know, Freedom Fest is an event for libertarians to come together and essentially to figure out a way to get the government off their backs, right? How do we live in a way that where we can express ourselves and we can live freely while, you know, having the government do the government's role but maximize the human independent potential? Well, the opposite meeting happens every year at the World Economic Forum, where it's the exact opposite, where instead of people saying, hey, how do we kind of be left alone, it's more like, well, how do we control the populations in order to maximize what we believe is the best thing, the best outcome for society. And the bugs aspect of it is quite interesting because what we saw was that, indeed, it might be the case that, let's say, 10 years from now, it'll be so subsidized that you won't necessarily be forced to eat the bugs, but society might change in a way that you go to the supermarket and on the store shelves, the price of meat is, let's say, $25 for a pound of hamburger patty versus $7 for a pound of cricket patty. And then there's no real option. That's just how it'll be. That seems to be the direction we're going in. We're just like with the COVID vaccine, no one's going to force you to take it, but they'll create the conditions where you really don't have an option. Next up is Mr. Mark Morano. He is the author of two phenomenal books.